Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are honored and privileged to be sitting down with Ammon Bundy, who needs no introduction but is currently candidate for the governor of the great state of Idaho. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Ammon, I want to talk to you about some recent news that's happening here in North Idaho. Black Rifle Real Estate received a letter from multiple listing service advising him against using terms Constitution and liberty because MLS deemed those terms racially charged. In my opinion, MLS is racist. What do you think about that?
When I read the Declaration of Independence, we have a document that makes it very clear in written and become a very, one of the original, it is the original founding documents of this nation. And it says that all men were created equal, and that all men were given certain unalienable rights, meaning rights that others should not take. And those include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It didn't say all white men. It didn't say all black men. It didn't say Asian or any other type. It said all men are created equally. And I think we can infer because of the language that they're talking about men and women, and that they were created by God. And so how could in any way, in any logic, anybody's logical mind, that can be considered as racist, unless you believe that there is a certain race that is superior or that should be treated different. And then all of a sudden that document becomes racist, because to them, racism is anything that doesn't promote a certain race. So no, we need to completely reject these ideas from these racist people. And understand that these founding documents were striving to bring, justice and opportunity to all people, not just a certain race.
Could you explain a little bit about your history with the ideas of this country was founded on, and when it dawned on you how great they were and why you continue to support them to this day?
So my family in 1877 went to Southern Nevada, one of the most arid places in the country. And it's one of the most driest, arid desert places in the country. And they settled there 100 and almost 150 years ago. And before, there was heavy equipment, before there was air conditioning, before there was even things like swamp coolers and stuff. They were living on tents in the middle of 120-degree dry heat weather with no relief, even at night. And they diverted the waters, created farmland, leveled the lands, began to produce. They went up on the mountains. They began to find the springs up there and divert those waters into water troughs and run cattle up on the foothills. And they carved a living out of a very rugged area where no one else wanted. And the opportunity to do that was given to them simply because they were willing to take it. And it wouldn't have mattered at that time or any time if it was a black person, if it was an Asian person, anybody who wanted to go out there and to do what my family did had the opportunity to do so. And then, 70, 80, more like even 100 years later, because this was in 1877 that they went there. About 100 years later, not quite 100 years later, we have the federal government that comes along and says, well, this belongs to us. It doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to your family. It belongs. And it forced us to understand the law, understand the Constitution, which is the law, and to understand its premise. It was drafted and what it is. And it is a document that protects the rights of the people. It legally makes this so that the government cannot oppress us when we exercise our agency, our freedom, and whether that's in trading with each other, using different methods to track that trade or to use that trade. That could be currency. That the government's job was not to infringe or restrict, it was to protect. And so we started understanding that and living by that. And ultimately, what happened was the federal government came down upon us, 213 armed federal agents, snipers on the hills, threatened that if we resisted in any way that they would kill us. And we continued to stand, and people from all over the country came and stood around us, and we turned the tide. We made it so that they had to flee. The federal government had to leave the area immediately. People demanded that. And it showed me what true liberty, how true liberty is preserved. It's not preserved in the courts. It's not preserved in the ballot box. Those can help in certain ways, but it's preserved by people claiming, using, and defending their rights and calling upon their neighbors to help them when they need it. And that's exactly what is taught in the Declaration of Independence and what is when our lives were being threatened by federal agents.
Can you speak more, in your opinion, what the significance of that event was in the context of recent history or just history general in the United States? How have you thought about that event since?
Well, never has that happened before, where the federal government, and I even hate to say the US government, because these bureaucracies are not prescribed in the Constitution and they're not functioning within the authority. So I hate to say US government, although it was under that guise, I guess, but the federal government, these federal agencies came down with, the full force of the US government. And they tried to destroy my family. They started destroying our ranch, killing the cattle from helicopters, burying them in mass graves, destroying our water infrastructure that's been in there over 100 years, destroying our corrals and access and so forth. And the people were not okay with it. They came and literally gave them an ultimatum to leave or they will be removed. And these federal agents chose to pack up within 1 hour and leave, and they left in 107 federal vehicles and never came back. And I mean, the significance of that is there's been nothing ever happen like that again. And then my family and I went through two federal trials, massive federal trials, while we were incarcerated, and we beat them in their own courts twice, so bad that when we walked out of there, when we walked in, we were facing 106 years of minimum sentencing, or when we were drug in, I should say. We were facing 106 years of minimum sentencing. They were trying to take our entire lives away. And when we walked out without even a misdemeanor. And we had beat the best attorneys that the world knows, a massive team of US attorneys. They spent $100 million trying to prosecute us. And we beat them, this little ranching family, beat them, and we didn't do it alone. We did it with the help of the Lord. We did it with the support of the people, but we did it, and it's never been done before in history. Either one of those occasions have never happened in history, and we've been able to experience them multiple times.
Why are you running for governor of Idaho?
Well, I would be lying to you if I said I wanted to be governor of Idaho. Be the governor of Idaho. What I want to be is a father, a husband. I like to be in business. I'm an entrepreneur. Really, I have a huge entrepreneurial heart. Started multiple businesses from scratch and built them up to multi-million-dollar businesses. And so I don't have a desire, a natural desire to be a governor, but I do see a problem. And I do see that a fight that has to be fought, and it needs to be fought by somebody who has experience in fighting this battle and who has been through the fires. And I believe that I qualify for that. And if somebody else would do it, and I felt could do it, then I wouldn't run.
That differs from a lot of politicians, I think, who maybe do crave that power. And I think we've seen that play out, especially over the last year and a half. Idaho
Well, my
did.
intent is to strip power down, not to take it. I plan on going into the governor as more like a king, because unfortunately that's the way that these positions are, whether you're president, governor, or even mayor in some cases. You're treated in position wise as more like a king, where you issue an edict and everybody obeys. And that's not what our country was founded on. Our country was founded on a constitutional republic of representative government. And so I plan on, going in as a position of governor the way it is now. And when I leave, I plan on being a governor of a constitutional republic where the legislature has the authority that they're supposed to have, and the rest of it is restored to the people.
Can you speak more about that philosophy? Because I think there's been a lot lost in, well, I guess the public schools in particular, because Houghton Mifflin failed to actually explain the importance of the founding of this country. And the only history book we read is, perhaps Howard Zinn's People's History, if you're lucky, which is a very critical book of U.S. history. And that is good. However, I think that you could read other books such as The Ideological Origins of the American Revolution by Bernard Bailyn and learn about the real principles upon which this country was founded. So could you speak? You said you want to strip away power. Like, that's a philosophically significant statement that I don't think actually is a discussion being had, interestingly, by the Democrats. When I was younger, a lot of us looked at the Iraq War and didn't like that. It left a sour taste in our mouth with the Republicans, but there's clearly been at least a PR switch where Democrats are clearly at least openly heavy-handed and authoritarian in contraposition to the Republicans who at least espouse these founding ideals and have in some cases been the only ones who have stood up. I think Rand Paul comes to mind, Kristi Noem comes to mind, and others. So could you kind of speak to this this concept of what your role actually should be as a public servant?
Yeah, and I'll be a little specific when it comes to governor and the legislature. We have on our federal, state, and county and city levels, we have a real problem here where the bureaucrats, and what I mean by that is the full-time government employees, they are running the state, the counties, the federal government. They're running the governments. And they are the bureaucrats. They are the ones that work for the government, and they are the ones that are employed full-time, typically for the government in whatever level of government. And that is not the design. And they're typically in the executive branches. So, supposed to be under the control of the president, under the control of the governor, mayors, and so forth. And so where they're basically running our governments. And that is not the way the design of our form of government is supposed to be. We're supposed to be a constitutional republic where the government is run, the power comes from the people. The people elect representatives, and those representatives are supposed to control and to oversee and to determine funds and all these things that they're supposed to do for the government, for the executive branch, including the full-time employees. But that's not happening. These bureaucrats, the full-time employees, they laugh at the legislature when they try to limit them. They mock them. They think it's hilarious. Oh, the elected, they'll say. Oh, the elected. They think they have power. And whenever anybody really tries to check and balance them, they unite and they destroy that person, demonize that person, and ultimately ruin that person in politics. And so understanding this and seeing this and understanding the threat, because this is not the first time in societies that those in full-time government have taken power. There's many different examples of this, and so it's a real problem, because you have, for example, like here in Idaho, you have the Department of Health that thinks that they can issue a health order requiring you people have never given the health department, the Department of Health in Idaho, authority to tell us whether we can go outside our houses or not, or whether if we leave our houses, we have to have a man-made filter over our face, or whether we have to inject certain things into our body. Never, ever have the people give the health department or any other department that type of power. So we have a situation where they've usurped that power. And I believe that the idea that the governor is still supposed to be in control of the state agencies. There's still that idea, even though most of the state agencies kind of run rogue and they more or less control the governor. I still believe the idea is there, and the people think that that is still what's supposed to happen. And I believe that because of that idea, that as governor, I will rally the legislatures and rally the people to strip the powers of the bureaucracies and restore the powers that belong to the representatives in the legislature. And the rest of it will go back to the people. And that's what I intend on doing, because that's where the danger is. And most of those running for governor or even any legislative position, they don't even understand where the problem is. But that's where it's at. The state of Idaho is not being run by its representatives. It's being run by the bureaucrats, the full-time government employees.
I don't know if this is terribly original, but I refer to this as the dictatorship of the bureaucracy. I've seen COVID policies play out in both California and Idaho. The Great Lockdown is what the IMF dubbed what everyone else is referring to as COVID-19 or the pandemic. The IMF sees it differently. They call it the Great Lockdown, and that is one of the most significant events in the history of man. Never before has, in such a coordinated manner, so many societies been told that they have to stay at home, that they can't assemble, for instance. Obviously, the First Amendment was, the bureaucracy attempted to throw it out the window in 2020. You couldn't go outside and do anything. In many places in the world, you still cannot do anything. In March, when California locked down, they put caution tape around parks so that the people were not able to go walk on the parks. You could only stay on the sidewalk. Park rangers stood at the entrances and didn't let you onto the park. In terms of stopping the spread of a virus, there's absolutely no science behind roping off patches of grass and not allowing people to step on them with the threat of violence, which is what a park ranger essentially is there doing with a gun on his holster. There was a realization that in some ways the Soviet Union maybe didn't lose the Cold War, and that what we've really seen is kind of a fusion of these two different types of system. Kind of US style free markets, but then also kind of a more Soviet style top-down economy. China maybe has operated under this type of system for quite a while now. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who is a foreign policy advisor to Jimmy Carter and also advised Barack Obama, has referred to this as commercial communism. That's what I saw playing out in a West Coast city. Now, the main difference, in my opinion, between some of these, quote, red states and the blue states is that in the red states, the people think for themselves perhaps more. They don't just listen to the edicts of bureaucrats. Whereas in California, people lend themselves a little bit more to that. Could you speak a little bit to kind of this rugged individualism, how important it has been in the history of this country and how important it's going to be going forward?
Yeah, and how rare it is as well. The idea that a person has full jurisdiction over their life, over their body, unfortunately has been rare in the history of this world. And the reason why it's been rare is because there have been those that have wanted to control man from the very beginning, from any, from the beginning of written history and beyond. There's always those that want to, in any society, in any combination of people, if you will, that have always tried to control other people. And I refuse to live that way. I was born, I only have one life. I have one life, and I am going to live that life free. I am not going to live it under the control of another person. And who gave that person authority? Nobody did. He was born just like he puts on his pants just like me. Well, maybe not in the Middle East or something. Maybe they put on their pants different, or their skirts, or whatever you want. But either way, he is just a man, just like me. And why does anybody else think that they have a right to control my life or anybody else's life? It's just contrary to the way that it's supposed to be. And my life is equal to anybody else's life. And I would be in the wrong if I try to control somebody else. So, I mean, to me, that's what it comes down to. It comes down to that right to rule your own life. And I believe that that is the battle that we are fighting right now, to the point where, we're now saying we're actually fighting to go outside. Literally, I mean, you've got Australians and Canadians that are being beat to the ground, that are having riot police come and attack them for stepping outside on the streets. Never has there been anything like that in history. Yet a lot of people are accepting it as for safety. And so I could go into a great detail about that, but we simply, as people, we can't live and do the things we need to do in our life, including pursuing happiness, owning property, and preserving our lives, if we have other people trying to control it. And so I know I won't live that way. And I could go into some of the ideological things that are happening, which is really more like a theological movement. It's not even an ideological movement, it's a theological movement. And compare it to things that have happened in the past, where you've got, for examples, like the kings. They're saying, that the priests will say that the kings were divinely appointed. And so therefore, if you disobey them, you're disobeying God. And then the kings in return would declare that a certain priest or a certain church was the state church. And we start to see these patterns of things with what are happening now, and we compare them to what has happened in the past. It's just the same thing over and over again.
There's almost like this subconscious assumption amongst some of us that all of history has like led into us, and history ended at some point, and now we're just kind of in like, Disneyland or something all the time. So I wanted to read the definition of a constitutional republic real quick, because there is very clearly a lot of confusion about that. A constitutional republic is a state where the chief executive and representatives are elected, and the rules are set down in a written constitution. And very clearly, that's we have that tool, a constitution, by which we can lead our lives, essentially. And it still is relevant today in more ways than I think people realize. There's this notion that it's like an outdated document. It's not that old when you actually have perspective about the history of man. And then Australia, go ahead.
I would add to that definition that that is correct, and that the sovereignty belongs, or it remains, with the people, that the people are the sovereign. That's clearly an important part of a constitutional republic.
You mentioned Australia. I think that is a really important news for us as Americans today, to keep an eye on Australia and to understand what's going on there and how it relates to us. I think it's important that We always sanction these other countries for abusing human rights. Australia is looking ripe for the taking right now on that front. So I think increasingly, like, we should be concerned with Australia, and that Americans should maybe kind of take an active position towards Australia, because a lot is on the line there, I think, for all of humanity, quite frankly. The reason why things have become so draconian in Australia is because the people are on an island and there's nowhere for them to go. So it's essentially like a test laboratory for tyranny. And we see now in places like Melbourne, you're not allowed to go outside for more than 2 hours a day. You can't go outside if you don't have a vaccine passport. You have to wear a mask everywhere. Also, you can't leave 5 kilometers of your home. Your children have to pick 2 friends and they have to stick with those friends. And those are the only friends that they can see. There's worse things as well, I'm pretty sure, that I'm forgetting. Could you speak to that?
Yeah. So first of all, there's absolutely no evidence that anything that they're doing is effective. In fact, if anything, it could be harmful because of the natural immunity that they're not allowing to happen by simple association with each other. And so I could give, many uh, scientific and medical studies that show that exactly what they're doing is opposite of what they should be doing, and leave liberty out of it. However, that is the most important part. And I'll a little bit of background. I spent 2 years in federal prison, falsely accused over the whole thing that happened to my family and our ranch. And again, we left there without even a misdemeanor and beat them in two massive federal courts trials. And but half of that time I spent in solitary confinement, which was a shock to me because I'd never been in prison before. But I spent, about approximately a year of my time in there in solitary confinement. And the pattern, or the solitary confinement schedule, I'd just say, is that they would typically take your last name and they put you in a rotation, and you come out of your cell when everybody else is locked in your cell, and you would come out for an hour at a time. You could shower, you can exercise, you can grab a book or two, and then you got to go back in your cell when the hour's up. And then the next person on the list would come out for an hour. And that way we all lived in the same pod, but we never ever had any contact with each other. Well, that is exactly what they've implemented in Australia. Exactly. They have implemented solitary confinement schedule and rules and policies. And I know that Australia was a penal island, and and I wonder if it ever stopped being that. But the people of Australia are being put under solitary confinement, and they don't have any way to correct that. And when a people become so oppressed and they can't, and basically they lose the resources to defend themselves, then this type of thing is what happens, and they become dependent on somebody else freeing them from their oppression. And in the past, it's been the United States that have gone and said, look, what you're doing, I mean, even if we took 5 years ago, or even 3 years ago, if Australia tried to do this to the people, the United States would have stepped in and said no. They would have, historically, they would have gone and give the resources for the people to defend themselves. And now we're basically trying to do the same thing in our own country. The only reason why they haven't been able to do it is because the people are rejecting it, and we're armed. But we have our president, that has said basically, I'd love to have the actual words of what he said. I do have them somewhere in my notes, but he basically has said that for those that are unvaccinated, he says that our patients are wearing thin, and that you have hurt us badly, he said. which is completely nonsense, complete nonsense. But that talk is basically him saying, look, and then he says that our patient, well, what happens when his patients has worn all the way through? What's he planning on doing? He's isolated the 20 to 25% that he says is unvaccinated. And he says that we've harmed them and damaged them. This is the president of the United States saying this. And people need to be aware that, look, there's a plan, even in this country, to completely put us into complete control. And that's not conspiracy. That's what they are planning on doing. They're now isolating a certain population that basically that population believes in freedom and believes in God. They believe that their right to freedom doesn't belong to the government. And they have found a way through these COVID methods to isolate that group. And now they know, they've even documented, they know even by name through a selection of polling, really, who these people are. And whenever that has happened in the past, if the people do not defend themselves and do not unite soon enough, it always ends in isolation from the rest of the population. Then they will demonize them. And then if they can, they will destroy, even to the point of genocide. And so that's historically what's happened. And I see them very clearly, basically identifying about 20, maybe a little over, probably around 20 to try to isolate us, demonize us, so they can destroy us.
And that's what we're seeing in Australia. And I think that when we have global governance and very clearly who managing response, then one can assume that similar policies will be implemented or tried to be implemented here in the United States. So do you have any message to our fellow Australians, I'll call them in some ways, because come on, that's kind of the system we're under now. What's your message to Australians as they increasingly, try to fight for the right to go outside?
Well, they have to not comply. Non-compliance is extremely important. And because they've lost their ability to defend themselves, meaning they've lost their weapons, they've lost the ability to have guns, and they have turned that over. Shame on them. Shame on you for doing that. Because you've done that, now you have to have massive amounts of people entering the streets and just not complying, to the point where the government simply cannot deal with you. So they can't deal with the mass amount of people. You can't use any type of force or violence, even rightfully in defense, because you have no way to defend yourselves. And so just massive amount of non-compliance, entering the streets, refusing to comply. And if you do that, you may peacefully be able to overcome this. Although I will say the agenda is pretty clear. And I do not doubt that orders would be sent to, open fire on crowds, that type of stuff. And I would have to say that in your policing departments, that there would be a lot of them that wouldn't do that. But how many have they selected and got it down to the point where there's those in the policing department, enough of them that they would actually go and open fire? They're already running the streets in riot gear and with MRAPs and so forth, driving you guys back into your homes. They already think that somehow that they're justified in doing that. They already believe that. So I guess my long answer is that you have to not comply, because when you're in a situation like that, there's only three things that you can do. You can accept the tyranny and just live under tyranny. You can flee and go somewhere where it's better, or you can non-comply, which ultimately is a form of, fighting back. And that's where you're at right now.
I think we're seeing the beginnings of like one of the largest peaceful resistances in the history of mankind. It's going to be a sight to behold. We're all witnessing history, what's been termed recently by some as like a war for the world. And I found out about this stuff when I was studying history in college. And in history at the university, I learned about kind of the how all of this happened, but not the like real true why, not the a bunch of other like not the what that was. What was the Nazi state really? I didn't learn that, but I did learn how. And in my extracurricular, how they did it, commit those atrocities. And in my extracurriculars, I learned the why and the what this actually was. And I focused on my career from about 2013 or so till 2020, after having been active in this space and really thinking openly on the internet and otherwise about these topics. And then when 2020 hit, when they locked down California and the rest of the US, it was very clear what this was, and that it wasn't to mitigate the spread of a virus. And to this day, the evidence continues to actually support those who are anti-lockdown, those who don't want to wear masks. It supports those who are not interested in getting a unapproved vaccine, which flies in the face of the Nuremberg Code. Science has our backs there as well. And time again, those who have actually been skeptical of the science have been proven correct in their skepticism. So now we're kind of seeing a divide. Those who clearly have no interest in science and will never change their worldview, and those who are more philosophically minded, more scientifically minded, and willing to amend what they think or believe to be true. And and we're seeing that play out in Australia through the police departments very clearly, like orders are being sent there. They did just turn up the heat. The protesters were peacefully demonstrating, and I believe it's being claimed that the Australian police then incited violence with rubber bullets, namely. And I think to hammer your point home and kind of put a bookend on this, that peaceful noncompliance is certainly going to be in mass numbers a tool of Australia, and the rest of us are going to have to, I think, also speak up and say this is unacceptable. Like why aren't we putting more pressure on the Australian government to acknowledge the human rights of its population? I heard one refer to this recently as whereas like in North Korea, they tell you that Kim Jong-un brought you the sunset, that in Australia, they're telling you not to look at the sunset. So things are getting very serious here very quickly. You mentioned one thing that I think was very important. When it comes to a place like Idaho, the people just simply don't listen. And there's nothing that Governor Little, who did lock this state down, or any of the other bureaucrats at all the other levels can do when the people in enough numbers just don't listen. Can you speak more to that? How you plan on I guess, interacting with that dynamic as governor?
Well, so I think that's where we need to be as a people. We need to be to the point where we understand that there's a certain role of government, and beyond that, they don't have authority, power, and we should not comply whatsoever at all. And it's very simple because it's not about government at all. Because I believe the definition of freedom is that I can do whatever I want as long as I don't infringe upon my neighbor's rights or somebody else's rights. That's what freedom is. I can do whatever I want as long as I do not infringe upon somebody else's right. And so, and when I do infringe upon somebody's rights, in certain cases, the government has been given authority to act, to defend that person. And that is the only time they have authority to act and use force. And so it's very simple. And so people must not comply to anything that the government says or does that is unauthorized, because they've usurped a tremendous amount of power. And in Idaho, we early on, I mean, I'm talking the first week, that the next day, I had my first people's rights meeting, if you will. It wasn't really called that then, but the governor gave his order, I think on Tuesday or Wednesday, and we had our first meeting on Thursday. We assembled and we began from that moment on to send a message to the people, to the government here in Idaho, including the governor, that we will not comply. We will confront you. Even to the point where I think it was a week or so later, a mother got arrested at a park here in Idaho, and several hundred of us went down to the officer's house, served him an official redress of grievance, and protested there at his house and said, look, we are going to hold you personally accountable. If you're going to do these things, you personally, Mr. Officer, are going to be held accountable. And shortly after that, the Meridian Police Department decided that they were not going to enforce any COVID mandates. And we started sending this message throughout all these police departments, all these cities, through the governor, counties, all over the state. And then we spread to other states. We clearly sent the message that we will not comply to your attempt to control what you do not have authority to control. And because of that, Idaho has been more free. But it's only for one reason, simply because the people did not comply. That is why Idaho has been more free, because the people have chosen to not comply. And they have basically said these rights, the right to leave our homes, the right to trade with, that belongs to us, and the government does not have jurisdiction over it.
So we saw Black Lives Matter kind of spiral out of control last summer, and that was a movement that pretended to be in favor of Black people's rights, but really, in my opinion, that was kind of just like a organized organization that was used to kind of like exploit Black people in order to create chaos and divide the people, and perhaps even bring down real estate levels so BlackRock can come in and buy up neighborhoods. That was kind of the real, I think, result of that movement. And then we saw Blue Lives Matter sprout up. And I was raised by a police officer, and I have a great respect for police officers, but I don't have respect for the police officers in Australia who are like beating their citizens senseless because they want to go outside. So I think it's a fine line to walk. But what we have seen in the United States, however, is very clearly a lot of departments and agencies were not upholding the health orders. And that, I think, speaks brilliantly of where we are at in the US, perhaps why we actually remain today one of the freest countries on the planet. I was speaking with somebody who's traveling the world from India originally, and he says still today, when I travel to each country, this is the only country where I'm not required to quarantine, for instance, when I come in. And at the local level, I think so much of our freedoms over the last year and a half were preserved because of our police departments and sheriffs. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so I personally have a love-hate relationship with the police. I mean, I do. And I honor them. I couldn't be more grateful for them when they stand up for my rights, when they protect me against those who are trying to take my rights, which is the definition of a criminal, someone who's trying to take something that doesn't belong to them. And that could be liberty, that could be property, that could be them trying to take my pursuit of happiness, my life. And so when I have a policing agency, and it's really more like an officer that is willing to protect me, I could not be more grateful. I could not have more honor for that person. But on the same side, or the other side, I should say, when you have an officer of the law who is infringing upon your right, who is enforcing unconstitutional mandates, policies, then I completely despise them. They're disrespectful to me. I do not believe that they should hold that power, because the entire purpose of their office is to protect the rights of the people. And so I don't look at it as, all one encompassing law enforcement body. I look at it as individuals. And those individuals might go all the way up to a superior that's requiring his agency or department to do certain things. Or it might come down to an individual who's just patrolling the streets. Each person has a responsibility, and they'll be accountable to that, to their choices. They won't be accountable eternally to their superior. They're going to be accountable eternally to the creator of this world, who gave us our life and our freedom. And that's who they'll be accountable to. And so they need to think more about that. So again, it's a love-hate relationship with me. I love those officers that protect my right and uphold their oath of office and their commitment to the United States Constitution and to the state constitutions. And I'm not very happy with those who don't do that.
So there has been legislation in Idaho presented to allow the Idaho treasurer to invest in gold and silver that must be physically stored in Idaho. Representative Ron Nate put this forth. He says, with new concerns about financial instability, it makes sense for investors and it makes sense for states to turn to real assets, especially in terms of precious metals, to protect investments of their funds. I'll say also the Constitution lays out a bimetallic standard. Can you explain what your fiscal monetary policy, your relationship with alternative assets like gold, silver, and Bitcoin would be as Idaho governor?
Yeah, so I will reference, your listeners, your viewers to go to the Keep Idaho plan, my Keep Idaho plan at votebundy.com for more details. But there's a huge problem with government overreach today. And it's the unlawful intrusion into the financial lives of individuals. And people just don't have the financial privacy anymore. And no matter which way you spin it, our currency system is a violation of the Fourth Amendment, and we should be able to be protected in that. And so as governor, I intend on using, I guess we'll say cryptocurrency and obviously we're going to have to identify which ones and use those, but as using them as official state currency, where people can even pay their taxes in it, where the state will use that currency to pay its own bills in, and encourage that freedom that people receive when they use cryptocurrency. And I have a lot to learn. I am in no way an authority on these things, whether Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. I have a lot to learn, but I understand enough and see how it frees the people up and how it keeps us from being controlled through basically a world currency. Because what's happening to the states, really, I should say it this way, what's happening to the world when it comes to the US government printing money, and actually every dollar that they print actually makes the rest of the world less wealthy. And the same thing is happening to the people in the states. It's just not quite as impactful because we are part of the United States. So the currency benefits us more than the rest of the world. But this idea that you can print paper money and then send it to another country and they give us their hard-earned goods, and that paper money, the only thing that it was, the value it has is simply the value of the printing and the paper itself. That's a disservice to the rest of the world. And it's a disservice to the people of this country. And eventually, someone's going to have to pay the piper. And I would like to see the state of Idaho well entrenched in the trading using cryptocurrency and other currencies that truly have value to them. And so anyway, there's again a lot that I need to learn. I'm mostly promoting the freedom of those currencies, and I want to use that currency to to promote trade, uh, and and have it outside the control of the government. It's that simple.
Idaho's neighbor, Wyoming, has implemented blockchain legislation, a sandbox approach so that entrepreneurs can experiment without worrying if they run afoul of certain laws. As long as they weren't criminally intending to do anything, they're okay and protected in Wyoming. And I imagine that Idaho would easily forge an alliance on that front with Wyoming. I will say this though, Bitcoin is the freedom-minded cryptocurrency, and it's going to become very clear. And I see. So cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin are a great hedge against inflation, but they're not so much the safe haven of last resort that is gold and silver. That's kind of your
Yeah.
ultimate, just like safe haven. Can you speak a little bit to gold and silver in Idaho?
Yeah. I do believe that we are going to see uh, where the world will accept the dollar as the world currency. I think it's going to happen, fairly soon. We see Russia, we see China already working diligently to try to create another type of currency that will be accepted as the world currency. When that happens, the dollar will, I don't know, I don't think it'll fully collapse, but I do believe that it'll be uh, probably, anywhere from a 25 to 30, a third of what the value of what it is now. I think that that's realistic. I think we've seen that historically in times past. And when the world cannot trust a certain currency because it's been debased, then eventually it doesn't be it loses its world influence and no longer becomes the world currency. And when that happens, it immediately loses a tremendous amount of value because it can't be traded or printed anymore. It can't be traded as world currency, and therefore it can't be printed and be spent as a world currency. So with that being said, I think that it's very wise for a state like Idaho to be able to start to create or use another currency, to have it backed by gold. So, there is a gold standard there. And therefore, you protect the people of the state and those that are trading with the people of the state for when the dollar no longer is the world currency. Maybe I'm wrong in that. I just don't think I am. I just don't see how the world is going to allow the dollar to continue to be its currency when the United States government has not backed it and just keeps printing more dollars as if money literally grew on trees. And again, I have a lot to learn in this world of digital currency. And I just know in my personal finances, my personal business, that if I write a check, or then I better well be able to back that check. And also, I know that anytime that I'm in a hard situation, whether it might be for finances or trying to grow, if I have hard assets where I can actually do something or trade, that becomes more valuable than any money. And I believe that those same principles apply when it comes to the, a national currency, world currency, or a state currency.
We've had the honor of sitting down today with current candidate for governor of the great state of Idaho, Ammon Bundy. Thank you so much, Ammon, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And thank you everyone for listening. What's up, everyone? I hope you enjoyed the show. Head on over to GoldSilverBitcoin.com for more content like this, as well as long-form written articles about precious metals, Bitcoin, and other topics. Also, check out our shop where you can get precious metals, storable foods, and all sorts of other cool survival and prep gear as well.